The Disappearance. In the quiet suburban town of Westbridge, England, lived a 50-year-old man named Edward Clark. He was a retired school administrator who had spent most of his life serving in education. Edward was a calm, soft-spoken man, known among neighbors for his polite nature and disciplined lifestyle. Edward had a complicated personal life. He had been married twice. From his first marriage, he had 2 children, a son named Michael Clark, who had become a practicing doctor in London, and a daughter named Emily Clark, who was living abroad for her studies. After a strained relationship with his first wife, Laura Clark, Edward separated from her nearly 8 years ago. Following the separation, he eventually married a second woman, Sophie Bennett, who was significantly younger than him. Sophie moved into Edward's countryside property, a large, isolated house located on the outskirts of Westbridge, known as Willow Manor. Legally, the property belonged entirely to Edward. For a few years, Edward lived a quiet but increasingly isolated life. His contact with his son and daughter reduced over time. Michael, though a doctor, rarely visited his father due to his busy professional schedule and emotional distance. Emily, too, had little communication with him. Even Edward's former wife had completely cut ties. Only Edward's old family doctor, Dr. Henry Wallace, occasionally visited him for routine checkups. He had known Edward for many years and remained concerned about his declining social connections. However, things inside Willow Manor were far from peaceful. Growing tensions in Willow Manor. Sophie Bennett, Edward's second wife, had begun developing a close relationship with a local man named Jason Reed, a man known in the area for his questionable character. Over time, Sophie and Jason's relationship grew increasingly intimate and secretive. Sophie soon became dissatisfied with her life at Willow Manor. Although the house legally belonged to Edward, she began demanding ownership rights and financial control over the property. She argued with Edward frequently, insisting that she deserved equal control over the estate. Edward refused. He was a firm but non-violent man, unwilling to transfer ownership or alter his will under pressure. This disagreement escalated into frequent verbal disputes. Neighbors occasionally reported hearing loud arguments from the property, but no one imagined the situation would turn dangerous. At one point, the conflict became severe enough that police were called to Willow Manor. Sophie accused Edward of physical abuse, claiming he had assaulted her during an argument. Edward denied all allegations. Dr. Henry Wallace, who was visiting Edward around that time, also came forward. He testified that Edward was physically weak and incapable of such violent behavior. Several respectable local residents also supported Edward's character, stating he was peaceful and non-aggressive. After some initial investigation, the matter was temporarily settled and no charges were filed. But behind closed doors, tensions continued to rise. The Disappearance. Not long after the dispute, Edward Clark suddenly disappeared. Sophie informed neighbors that Edward had left town for personal reasons. She claimed he had gone to visit relatives abroad and would not be returning for an extended period. However, something about her explanation did not convince everyone. Edward's daughter, Emily Clark, returned from abroad after several months to visit her father. She attempted to meet him at Willow Manor, but found the house unusually quiet. Sophie told her the same story, that Edward was away. Emily tried contacting her father repeatedly over the next few weeks, but his phone remained switched off. Concerned, she contacted local police stations and reported him missing. Initially, her complaint did not receive serious attention. The police recorded the report, but did not take immediate action, assuming it might be a voluntary disappearance. However, Emily refused to give up. She repeatedly visited authorities, insisting that something was wrong. Suspicion and investigation. Under pressure from Emily, senior police officials reopened the case. During questioning, Sophie Bennett changed her statement. She now claimed that Edward Clark had died nearly a year earlier due to natural causes. According to her, she had buried him privately on the property because she was emotionally distressed and did not want public attention. This statement immediately raised suspicion. Emily strongly denied this claim and told police that Sophie had never informed the family about Edward's death. She also stated that Sophie had never called or attempted to notify them. Dr. Henry Wallace confirmed that Edward had no known terminal illness and was in stable health during his last checkup. Due to conflicting statements, the police obtained a court order for exhumation of the alleged burial site at Willow Manor. The grave discovery. Forensic teams arrived at the property and excavated the location identified by Sophie. What they discovered shocked everyone. Instead of a recent burial, they found skeletal remains that had clearly been buried for approximately 1 year. However, the condition of the remains suggested something more disturbing than a natural death. The forensic examination revealed signs of trauma inconsistent with natural causes. Fractures and injuries suggested that Edward Clark had been murdered, not buried after a natural death. DNA testing confirmed the remains belonged to Edward Clark. A full post-mortem report concluded that Edward had died due to violent physical assault, followed by an attempt to conceal the crime through burial on private property. The arrest. Following the forensic confirmation, police launched a full criminal investigation. Digital evidence, including call records, CDR data, financial transactions, and communication logs, revealed frequent contact between Sophie Bennett and Jason Reed around the estimated time of Edward's death. Further investigation showed that Jason Reed had visited Willow Manor multiple times during the period when Edward was believed to have died. Under mounting evidence, both Sophie Bennett and Jason Reed were arrested on charges of murder, conspiracy, and concealment of a corpse. Conclusion of the case. The investigation concluded that Sophie Bennett and Jason Reed had plotted against Edward Clark due to financial and property-related disputes. Their intention was to gain full control over Willow Manor and Edward's assets. Edward's death had been carefully concealed, and false narratives were created to mislead family members and authorities. However, persistence from Edward's daughter Emily Clark and the professional diligence of forensic teams ultimately uncovered the truth. The case became widely discussed in legal and law enforcement circles as an example of how domestic disputes, if ignored, can escalate into serious criminal acts. Final reflection. The tragic death of Edward Clark highlighted the importance of timely investigation in missing person cases, especially when family disputes and property conflicts are involved. It also showed how critical forensic science and persistent legal action can be in uncovering hidden crimes. In the end, justice was served, but only after truth was buried, uncovered, and finally revealed from beneath the soil of Willow Manor.